Welcome to In This Body, a podcast where we dive deep into the potent power of embodiment. I'm your host, Ailey Jolie, a psychotherapist deeply passionate about living life fully from the wisdom within your very own body. The podcast In This Body is a love letter to embodiment, a podcast dedicated to asking important questions like, how does connecting to your body change your life? How does connecting to your body enhance your capacity to love more deeply and live more authentically? And how can collective embodiment alter the course of our shared world? Join me for consciously curated conversations with leading experts. Each episode is intended to support you in reconnecting to your very own body. This podcast will be available for free wherever you get your podcasts, making it easy for you to stay connected to In This Body, the podcast with me, Ailey Jolie. Welcome back to another episode of In This Body. Today I have the great honor sitting with Chandresh, a 7th generation spiritual teacher, author, and speaker whose work masterfully bridges ancient wisdom and modern spirituality. Chandresh is the founder of the Break the Norms movement, which challenges our conditioned beliefs about God, truth, life, death, and relationships, offering us a new path toward authentic living. Born to a lineage of spiritual teachers, Chandresh was introduced to the world of Tantra and meditation from a young age. Through his best-selling book, Break the Norms, and his popular podcast, The Layla Show, Chandresh invites people to question societal norms and embrace a spiritual path grounded in love, freedom, and embodied wisdom. Personally, I've been captivated by Chandresh's ability to blend the sacred with the practical. His teachings on spirituality are not just philosophical, they offer real tools for transformation in our everyday lives. Today, we will dive deep into the powerful intersections of spirituality, embodiment, and Tantra, exploring how these ancient practices can help us break free from societal expectations and connect more deeply with ourselves and the world around us. Chandresh, I'm beyond excited to welcome you to In This Body, the podcast with me, Ailey Jolie. The one thing I wanted to ask you right at the start is that you come from a rich spiritual lineage that spans 7 generations, and I would love to hear from you what that was like in that environment, how those impacted your understanding of spirituality, because at least in my very Western bubble, it's very rare for me to meet people who have spirituality really woven into their intergenerational
Mhm.
story.
Growing up among the teachers, masters, one thing I didn't know that they were teachers or masters
Mm.
because my teacher is my father, my father's teacher is grandpa. I lived very close to Dalai Lama's, monastery. So I didn't even know how big or grand his name was and is. So for me, they were just people, right? Uh, my father's lessons didn't happen in a formal setting. We would be having morning tea, and he'll share something very crazy about Kundalini. We are walking, I'm driving, and while I'm about to take an exit, he'll share something about Tantra or goddess. And I'm like, I'm driving. I want to take notes on this. But because he was trained in this gentle, informal manner from grandpa, it wasn't a formal setting that every day 4 to 6 will sit and will discuss tantra or spirituality. One thing that it did in a beautiful way, I wasn't introduced to what I call textbook spirituality until a long time, because I realized that's a very different language. Or because I have written a book, so I know publishers do have their own expectation, their own narrative, and they want you to stick to it. So I'm glad I got introduced to the textbook spirituality much later. And in my earlier years, when I was more raw, innocent, open, less corrupted by the chaos of the world, I was introduced to a very playful, gentle, creative form of spirituality, which wasn't so much about worshiping something outside of us, but going deeper and honoring that flame within you. That I didn't realize the importance of it until, I started reading books. I I wasn't a teenager anymore. Yeah.
I'd love to ask you, because it really piqued my interest. the difference between textbook spirituality and what you experienced. Because I think I've experienced a lot of textbook spirituality, and maybe at sometimes have been a little bit turned off by it as well.
Yeah, I'll give you one example because I'm hearing a lot of that lately. We'll take example of Goddess Kali.
Mm,
People have heard about her. When you look her up online, a very fixed image shows up. She's this ferocious, fierce, intense energy, blue, black bodied with skulls and blood. It's very violent image, angry image, violent image. But what if I tell you that's not at all how Goddess Kali's energy is? And I'm not saying out of devotion or love, I'm saying it out of absolute exploration of that energy because I grew up hearing a very gentle, calming, supportive narrative about Goddess Kali. I wasn't introduced to Kali through her pictures, the
mm,
pictures that you see online or in the
yeah.
books. I was introduced to her as a consciousness, that it's a consciousness, Kali consciousness, Shiva consciousness, Buddha consciousness. I was introduced to these names, concepts, ideas as consciousness. So in my head, in my mind, I still use the word Kali consciousness. When I teach about goddesses, I teach about consciousness that lives through them.
Mm,
Um, but imagine all the bestseller books on Goddess Kali. They talk about that one particular form. Rarely you'll come across a book that will transcend her beyond that image.
mm.
Yeah.
When you're speaking of this, for me, what's coming through my mind is the difference in modern spirituality, how there it can be this emphasis on transcending the body and really being in the mind. And yet, a lot of what you put forward, which is why I resonate with it, is integrating it into embodiment. And I would love how you define embodiment, if you do, within the framework of Tantra and how you believe it might be essential for spiritual growth in some ways.
Tantra, for those who are unaware,
Hmm.
Tantra is the science of self-awareness. That's how I define it. It's the science of transmutation of who you are, you know, your anger, greed, ego, pleasure, everything. It's a transmutation of your existing energies. The embodiment of Tantra is powerful because Tantra is embodiment. It's
Mm,
not you know it is embodiment. It is not about chanting of mantras that you don't understand. It's not about worshiping an image that doesn't make sense to you. Tantra is embodiment. Anybody could be a tantric practitioner or a seeker of it. I feel, in my experience, Ailey, anyone who has artistic heart, artistic vision, anyone who is into music, poetry, playfulness, they're already living the Tantra principles. That's the embodiment
mm,
of Tantra. Indulging in life with awareness. That's Tantra. And with awareness is the big highlight here.
mm.
Because if awareness is not there, then you're simply indulging.
I would love to hear from you why you know or imagine or hypothesize that piece has gotten missed.
I actually commented on my thread 10 minutes before this conversation. I wrote, some marketing experts sat together and figured that we live in a sexually obsessed and suppressed society, so let's
Hmm.
sell that part because people are obsessed about sex, they're suppressed about sex,
Hmm.
so this will catch a lot of attention, so let's put a product out there, a book, an idea that will reduce tantra to just that sexual pleasure, but also sexual pleasure uh, in its most impulsive manner, not in the
Hmm.
higher frequency manner. And when they put it out there, guess what? It got buyers, it got attention, and that's all the commercial, the capitalistic, society needs. If a product is selling, everybody would want to replicate that, and it's the greed behind it, the greed, the need to control, to have more and to keep having more. Yeah.
How do you separate your work out from what I'm imagining is people coming with? ideas and perceptions and some misconceptions around what your work is going to be, since you do share a space with a lot of this kind of capitalist greed that has marketed only one aspect of a whole lineage.
I think I made my peace with with this at this point.
Oh, I
But
love
I'll
that.
tell you, when I started this, like
Mm,
I was in Wall Street. I worked in finance for a while. That's another interesting journey.
mm,
After I left India, moved to New York because my dad was here. So we thought it would be nice to just be closer to him. He's also my teacher, and I didn't know I was going to be a tantra teacher or meditation guide or anything like that. I was just another 16-year-old boy who was studying in school. And after I left Wall Street, I left because I felt so passionate about Tantra, about the principles,
mm,
about also demystifying, the whole complexity around Tantra. And I remember feeling consistently angry, upset, disappointed with the mainstream narrative about Tantra because I would notice how people would have this resistance. They still do, right? I don't blame them because I also learned many of those people got manipulated, hurt, emotionally abused, financially abused by many of these so-called Tantra practitioners.
mhm.
And I don't blame the people when this kind of narrative goes out and the people feel scared. This is a very vulnerable thing we are talking about. So that took away my anger. When I remained in that anger mode for a long time, and I always felt in my mind I'm sort of some tantra police. That my job is to hunt down and close the shops that are selling wrong form of tantra. And I realize if I can't close any single shop, but if I can manage to speak about one thing, then 50 other misconceptions are being born every minute. So
Yeah.
my energy was going in a very interesting direction, which wasn't serving me.
Mm,
And that's when I remembered the tantric principle. And my teacher told me, you got to transmute your anger. You are a
mm,
tantra seeker. And that's when the book also happened because I realized anger isn't helping.
mm,
So this transmutation needs to happen. And I didn't realize when the book started to happen, book was written to transmute my anger about the situation. Uh, in this time, like today, September 11, 2024, I have made my peace with the craziness around tantra, around spirituality in general, right?
mm,
And I also realized that with the time, energy I have, I want to put my expression out there. I want to speak about the playfulness of goddesses. I want to speak about the sensuality, spirituality, creativity that tantra teaches because I spent my 20s and 30s, Ailey, in in being the tantra police, but now I want to be the poet of tantra traditions, the speaker of tantra tradition. So I think this is the shift that I've had.
love that language you used there, from shifting from the Tantra police to the Tantra poet. Like that
Yeah.
was like very beautiful. Um, if I bring us back in time because you piqued my interest, what was the moment you decided to leave Wall Street and really dedicate yourself to teaching?
I always say I'm the boy from the Himalayas. I grew up watching wild animals, wildflowers.
Mhm,
So a cage cannot contain me. That's what I always feel. Even till this date, if I find myself in any sort of cage, emotional, literal, any kind of mental shackle, my first task is to break that cage. So when I was in Wall Street, I realized very quickly this is a very shiny and glamorous cage,
mm,
and it's rewarding you, to stay in that cage. There were friends who were in that cage. They're still there. Every time we meet, they speak about they're going to leave this, start their own business, start their own work. It hasn't happened. It's been more than 15 years that I'm seeing, hearing these stories from many people I know there.
mm,
When I realized I am in this cage, I bet there was some goddess Kali energy that pushed me because I was 22 or so.
mm,
But I think young blood is hot blood, rebellious blood, they feel they can do anything. So I'm glad that blood boiled enough. And I thought, oh, I'll leave this. I don't need to be there. What I noticed there was huge disrespect for the feminine energy. That didn't
Mm,
go well with me. I didn't like the unconscious race toward money. I respect
mhm,
the energy of money a lot. I speak about it a lot, but in the Wall Street, I noticed it's unconscious rat race.
mhm.
You could be sitting on 100 million, but you'll mess up everything for another 500,000. That's the
Yeah.
unconsciousness that lives there. So you don't realize the value of 100 million because for that 0.001% of extra dollars, you'll mess up everything.
Mhm.
So when I noticed this, I don't know what spoke through me. I just decided to leave that completely. I left my GMAT exam, the MBA exam we take here, in the middle because I knew if I take this exam, get into MBA school, I'll not be able to get out. So yeah, that's
Very
how it happened.
interesting. We have some parallels, which I didn't know of just having that type of energy to walk away from careers that most people would seem quite concrete and lucrative, but also my experience was also quite caging. Like, if I do not leave this
Mm,
now, I don't think I ever will be able to.
yeah.
You said something though that I would love to circle back to was the disrespect for the feminine that you noticed when you were in that Wall Street bubble. If you could say a little bit more about what you noticed, because I'm loving how you frame your experience. It's really refreshing.
Yeah, I'll say there are three things that happened. I grew up in a family where women were always respected. I grew up in a family where the goddesses, the feminine energy was always spoken with a lot of love and grace. But I also grew up in a neighborhood where the women were not respected, where they were abused by their own, fathers, husbands, brothers. So these were two parallel experiences I was living as a child. I noticed the difference when a woman is respected and loved, how she blooms. When she's not respected and loved, how shrink, she becomes. When I left India, I thought it's just my small town that I
Mm,
witnessed this. I wasn't expecting that in Manhattan. I'll notice disrespect, abuse, but in a different way. It's
mm,
the it's more glossy, it's more subtle, it's more New York, So that's what I felt. I noticed it confused me, Ailey, because I'm meditating on goddesses. I'm writing about them. I'm writing poems about them. When I step into office, I notice the way men would talk about women. I notice any woman who is rising in her career there, how she's looked upon.
mhm,
And yeah, that started to confuse me. That started to create a lot of division in my energy. And when I started to speak with those women, I realized they know this and they have to work extra harder to stay and maintain that position.
mhm,
And I also realized it's a tough battle for them. Society, patriarchy is not ready to accept a strong woman who knows what she wants. And the blood started to again, boil in me, and I realized I cannot create any change uh, if I'm part of the circus. So I have to step out. I have to figure out a way to first strengthen my own energy because I feel very depleted, exhausted. And yeah, I think leaving Wall Street was almost an awakening moment in its own way.
mhm.
I had zero idea what I'll do, but I had some idea this is not where I want to be.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I didn't go back.
Do you feel like that sense of this is not where I want to be came from a sense of being connected to your body and having a level of embodiment? Because the way I'm even hearing you describing your experience, there is kind of this sensate quality that's fully there. And I'm genuinely curious, has that always been there for you? Or maybe you don't even notice it. As its therapist, I definitely notice it.
No, I do. As I was telling you that, noticed the shift in my
Hmm.
body, the
Yeah.
currents, the waves. It was always there.
Hmm.
I, yeah, it was always there. And for a long time, I thought this sensitivity isn't my strength. because I didn't notice that around me. Only person who validated that was my teacher. When I was very younger, I felt my body felt a certain way that something uneasy is going to happen. And I
Mm.
ran to my kitchen. My mom was there, my grandma, my father was there. They were cooking rice in the pressure cooker. I was in fifth grade. I pushed them all away from the kitchen. I said, this cooker is going to burst, I think. Nobody believed me. And my mom was like, you don't know how to cook. You better let us cook. So, but I pushed them out of kitchen. There were two doors. I closed it. The cooker bursted with loud sound. And I thought that was something just random that happened. But that was the
Mhm.
first time my father told me, you got to travel with me now to the temples and the spiritual journeys, that I go to, because something important happened and we got to nurture it. So he's the first person I think who validated that this sensitivity in the body that you feel, don't ignore it, like
Mm.
nurture it, respect it.
Do you feel like that has been ever hard for you to hold on to or has been challenging to keep connection to?
Oh yeah, tough. It's tough because um I realize it puts me in emotional spaces, intense spaces that I'm unaware of. Even in this conversation, this
Mm.
is probably one of the exceptional podcasts where I'm feeling this channel of emotions, right? So it's tough to stay connected to, because I use the word, Ailey, that I was less corrupted when I was little. And I really believe that our society, the beliefs around love, relationships, money, success, failure, it corrupts us. We want to be another clown in the circus. We want to be another rat in the race. And to maintain energy that's sensitive, that's poetic, that's vulnerable, it's challenging, because there are like one of the consistent advice I received when I was on in this work, when I left Wall Street, it came from someone who has done a lot of work with spiritual gurus as their manager, as their PR person, their publicist. This person constantly told me, never be vulnerable, never express your sensitivity. You got to appear strong. You got to appear as if you know who you are, as if you are always strong, always powerful. You cannot be vulnerable. I'm glad I heard this when I was in my 20s, because I stayed loyal to this advice for a while until I realized, oh God, this is such a suffering. This is a cage. This is suffering where I have to appear so strong. And if I go back to my old social media post, I notice how I was trying to appear so strong.
Mm.
But it took me a good number of years to first realize I don't need to be strong. I don't need to appear strong. And I could be vulnerable. I could be expressive. And now the work, my daily practice is so much to just honor this energy in the body, because I realize that's rare. That's powerful.
Very rare. And I'm imagining also that that vulnerability is what led you to write your book, Break the Norm, which touches on topics such as death and sex and ego. And I'm curious to hear more about your book just in general, because I would love listeners to have like a taste from you. But also, I'd love to hear from you why you chose to address like issues that are seem to be so taboo and often left out of the spiritual conversation, and how you see those topics as interconnected to both spirituality and embodiment as well.
Wow. So many questions in one
So many
question.
questions. Yeah, I'll let you take that wherever you want to go.
Yeah. The reason I wrote about breaking the norms was
Mhm.
because, we teach what we need to learn.
Mm.
So as a young boy in his early 20s, I realized I'm one thing that triggers me so much is are these blind norms, the social constructs that are thrown on you. And I thought living in India, it might be just my small town. But as I started to travel within India, beyond India, and then I started teaching in different parts of Europe, US, I realized everyone out there is suffering from these social constructs and norms. And they are enforced on them by the authorities. So this observation led me to explore what needs to happen. And it started with what I need to do within me first. And my answer was break the norms, break these
Mm.
norms. And that because I also saw the difference between how I understood spirituality in my family versus how it is sold out there, how it is taught out there. So also realized, this is popular narrative. I'm not religious, I'm spiritual kind of narrative. But
Mm.
within spirituality also, you could be so stuck in those old ideas and beliefs that doesn't serve you. So this is how the birth of Break the Norms happened. And I feel it's the unhingedness of those that energy, the rebellious energy I was carrying at the time.
Mm.
I remember when the publisher said, write a sample chapter for us first, and we want to see what you want to talk about breaking the norm. I
Mm.
picked death as my sample chapter.
Mm.
It wasn't planned, but when I, meditated, that's what showed up because I witnessed deaths of some really close people in my family, my sister, and then my childhood best friend. It made me realize spirituality is so much more than just what I also felt. It's exploration of your journey, of your soul, of death and life, both.
Mm.
So I wrote about death to begin with. That became the foundation of the book, and I realized I cannot go down. I have to keep peeling the next taboo. And all the things you read about and break the norms, be it sexual energy, death, relationships, topics of guru and God,
Mhm.
everything. I really wanted to put it out there. You got to break the norms associated with these topics. Otherwise, you'll simply be a remix of your family narrative, your cultural conditioning, and nothing good will come out of it.
How do you support people? Or how do you support people, or how do you conceptualize like breaking just even that I'm stuck in this story or I'm stuck in this mental script? With all of your wisdom and spirituality, are there practices that you feel help people break away from that norm of just living in their mind all of the time?
Yeah, I think there's so many different ways to hit this.
Hmm.
I'm curious to know about the story of the person, right? The language they're using and the way they're describing their pain, how resistant they are to their story, how open they are. And I think I try to understand the blockage in their receptivity because I feel it's not that you are not spiritually awakened. It's not that you are not a conscious being. The problem is you are there are so many barriers that you have unconsciously built. Your unconscious loyalty to your trauma, your unconscious
Mm.
loyalty to your fear. That's a big trouble because you don't even feel worthy of receiving love. You don't feel worthy of receiving abundance. So many times, my first step becomes how do I break this unconscious loyalty that they have toward their misery, toward their fear, and make them do nothing but receive? Because if I can get them to receive, a lot of magic can happen. Because as you know, you and I, we are just the mediums. We're just the companions in the journey of our students and clients who show up. My job is to keep nudging them, keep pushing them to open the heart, receive anything that comes, receive, take it in,
Mm.
build the trust that you too are worthy of that divine consciousness. You are worthy of that unconditional love because the way the humans have loved us, this is the kind of love we also build with the divine. And we feel divine love is also transactional love. I got to meditate a little more. Only then I'll receive it. So I've been there. I've done that. So this
Mm.
is why, I asked them, why do you think you need to, meditate 30 minutes more? Because if it's a big project coming, why do you think you need to work harder in meditation also? Why not simply show up with your childlike awareness and it will come? But I feel we are so wired to
Mm.
receive love in a conditioned way.
Could you say a little bit more about unconscious loyalty? It was such a beautiful framing of how, in my mind, I conceptualize that as just like the ingrained patterns or like what our soma is holding or all those experiences that live in our nervous system that like lead us to keep doing the thing we don't want to do anymore. But your languaging was really gentle and really soft, unconscious loyalty. Could you say a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, I'm laughing because I don't even know where to start on this. Imagine this is for all the listeners. Imagine one person that you genuinely trusted, loved, or expected that this person is my savior. This person is my hero. Usually it's, mom and dad, usually, because they are the first, exposures also that you have toward that male figure, female figure, love, affection, everything. So imagine someone that you really loved and you you felt I got to be loyal to them, in their story, in their journey. Now your loyalty goes so deep because you're also taught if you give me this, you'll get that. We learn very quickly as a child that I could get extra candy if I put some emotional tantrum, you know. So we also see mom and dad playing emotional, games with each other, and we realize, okay, this works. This trick works. I just got to figure out how I work it for myself. And this loyalty toward uh, getting that love, getting that affection goes so deep that you don't realize you start to become loyal to their trauma also. If the person you loved, if they're going through deep grief, deep trauma, and they are not happy, they are fully disconnected from their playfulness, somehow you also feel that you got to be also disconnected from your playfulness. You cannot be happy, you cannot be playful because mom has never been playful, because dad has never rested or relaxed. I shouldn't be showing up as a relaxed, playful person. That's just betrayal of the relationship I have with them. So unconsciously, you put on this role that we are all in this together. If you have gone through grief and sadness, I promise I'll also be equally sad with you.
Mm,
And I feel this runs in the family in a very interesting way. Like I know many families where you cannot rest, like you cannot just take a nap because it's just never been the narrative. You've got to keep doing, doing, and doing. You cannot be expressive in your sensuality and playfulness because that's shut down. No one talks about it. So this unconscious loyalty toward your culture, your family narrative, it's so dangerous. It's so destructive.
when you're speaking of this, what's going through my mind is really just this unconscious loyalty that almost all of us in the West have to some degree or another, to be disconnected or to be disembodied, um, and to be removed from the interconnectedness that exists like in our own body, between each other, with the earth. Um, how do you perceive like that unconscious loyalty in regards to how things are structured in the world around us right now?
I think I've traveled a lot. So I
Mm-hmm.
notice people also have unconscious loyalty toward their cities, you
Mm.
know? So you mentioned in the Western culture, what came to my mind right away is New York and LA because I spent so much of my time in these two cities. I know many people who have moved to LA to become actors, artists,
Mm-hmm.
but they have very strict idea of what it means to be an artist in LA, which is being on the Hollywood posters. They deny themselves the right to be an artist. They forget about honoring the inner artist because they become so obsessed with being the poster of a Hollywood, movie. So their unconscious loyalty to that one idea or dream that they had 10 years ago, it becomes so self-destructive that they destroy the artist within them.
Mm.
And I feel this unconscious loyalty toward a beautiful dream you may have had, you got to give chance for that dream to evolve because you have
Yeah.
evolved. After I wrote this book, Ailey Break the Norms, the second book, the book I wanted to write, the book they wanted me to write were two different books.
Mhm.
And as a younger person who wanted to be known as an author, it felt tempting. to just
Mm-hmm.
write the second book based on what they want me to, do, which was tantric sex book. I wanted to write a different my way of tantra book, and they said no, this won't work because the marketing is not there for the
Yeah.
sales will not happen. And I had to do the work to disconnect the or cancel, suspend the unconscious loyalty that I had toward writing the books.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the podcast happened, which actually changed my entire storytelling, the way I show up, and everything. So something good will come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question. I
You
went
did.
into, yeah,
I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how you or how you kind of advise your students to connect to their inner artist. I love that language as well.
yeah. Inner artist is is a little child, the 7 year
Mm-hmm.
old you who was so fearless, who fantasized about living in Wonderland, who believed all these superheroes actually come for them, you know. So that little artist doesn't follow any rules or norms. They don't care about satisfying or pleasing the audience because they only care about pleasing who they are, pleasing that inner artist. So I feel to honor the inner artist, you have to bring what I call self reverence. Have reverence for yourself. I don't use the word self respect or self esteem. I feel they're so used and done. But self reverence, it's almost like worshiping that force within you.
Mm-hmm.
That's a longing to express. That's waiting to write stories, poetry, gardening, cooking. It could be anything. This inner artist doesn't compare their journey to any other journey. This inner artist is so playful that it could simply endlessly play without the worry, oh, it's sunset now, oh, it's early morning, I have to follow this. No, it's inner artist is your rebellious, playful, creative child who wants to survive, who wants to thrive right now. There is no template or one dimension of it. But if there's a key to unlock it, it's self reverence. Prioritize giving yourself respect, love, compassion, and space where you could actually create that. It will take time. It won't happen in one morning session, right? It takes
Mm-hmm.
time. You have to break and shed the layers.
Absolutely. As you're speaking, I'm just thinking of the element of patience as well. Like the amount of,
Yeah,
like, I'm going to keep coming back, even though it's hard. I'm going to keep trying to connect to that playful part of me and see what it needs or wants to express today. That practice as well.
big time.
How do you feel creating the podcast has changed you? You said it changed like how you speak and your storytelling. How has kind of following that inner artist altered how you offer to
Yeah,
others?
I'll be, and I've never shared this anywhere before. The first book I wrote, Break the Norms, it was written out of that anger that I wanted to transmute. But at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, I also wanted to show up as an author, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I felt that's such an important part of my identity. I got to have that. After I had it, I realized, oh, it's actually not that important.
Mm-hmm.
What was more important was the need to express my truth, my stories. And I thought podcast might be the next outlet. And I had never heard of any podcast before, by the way. So I had zero experience of how to run a podcast,
Yeah.
but I decided to show up for it and start telling my stories. And I told my podcast engineer, the audio engineer, never tell me the numbers behind it. It's
Mm-hmm.
been, I don't know, 200 or how many hundred episodes. I still don't know the number of downloads
Love that.
because I told him if I want to enjoy this process.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was also wounded by the numbers game, and on
Mm-hmm.
Instagram was becoming big, but the recent meetings with publisher and everything, it just left me very bittersweet about the whole experience. So I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I want to express, that's all. And I started telling myself after first few episodes because I started receiving messages from people. Oh, I love this. I cried. I laughed. It's like, oh wow, it's doing its thing. So I realized I want to now honor the inner artist within me. I
Mhm.
tell this is an experiment I've done with the big names who are in the entertainment industry. When they don't get any project, I tell them, work on the inner artist, work on that inner storyteller. And it always works. It's so crazy because the rat race for validation, name, fame, wealth, more and more of everything, it
Mhm.
doesn't take you anywhere. It just makes you a puppet of what the capitalistic, algorithm wants you to do. So I think podcast gave me the permission to listen to the inner artist, to honor that inner storytelling. So I was able
Mhm.
to tell many stories. And yeah, I'm excited where it will go.
Yeah,
Well,
I love that you chose to redirect. I haven't spoken about this, but I am writing a book now, and I had an opportunity to write a different book. But it was very much like their idea of the book.
yeah.
And there's this really big tension inside for me where I was like, this is an amazing opportunity. And yet I could not get myself in front of my computer to sit down and write for the life of me. And then eventually the opportunity, floated away and
Mm,
the right one presented with an agent who was just like, no, that like I want exactly your voice, just your voice. Give me it all.
yeah.
Um, but it does take a level of also trust.
Yeah. Big time. Trust, self-trust is such a big thing. And by the way, the moment I saw you, Ailey, I was like, oh, there's a book here. So, so
Yeah,
I was actually going to ask you about the book after the podcast, but I'm
yeah.
glad you shared it. But yeah, it takes trust,
Mhm.
trust, patience, but also that willingness to give yourself that space, right?
Yeah.
What if you are in rush? What if the mind says this will be gone?
Mhm.
So take up this opportunity. And I guess there is no right and wrong for most people in this, but for someone like me who puts self-reverence as the highest, you know, thing in life, I feel you got to operate from that level of self-love, self-trust,
Mhm.
because you got one life. You got to play your games in the most gentle way.
How do you see slowing down as an absolute necessity if you feel it is absolutely necessary to connecting to your body or having a sense of embodiment? Because for me, they feel so tied. It's like as soon as I start getting a certain speed in my life, let that be sending a certain amount of emails or deadlines, I'm like, that connection to my body just like very slowly starts to wither away.
That's so true. I feel I've become a much more advocate of slow living. I,
Hmm.
I, being in school in New York, in Manhattan, slow living wasn't part of the
Yeah.
mindset at all. It took some time in California when I would hike uh, pretty much every day. That reminded me of my time in my small town in the Himalayas, where the mountains were also there. And somehow I started to realize this is how Mother Nature works. I would notice snakes, rabbits, squirrels, birds. I'm like, none of them have a business degree. None of them have a life coach, meditation teacher, therapist. But look at them. They are able to figure out, their next step.
Mhm.
They are surviving, living, thriving because they are in the nature. A snake is not trying to be a rabbit. Rabbit is not trying to be a squirrel. They all are simply being who they are. And nature is so soft and yet so strong. And during my most conflicted moments, I would stand on these mountains and just watch ocean and these squirrels, rabbits, birds, snakes coming and going. And it gave me this hope and confidence that it's okay to slow. You will not lose out on life
Mhm.
because nature will take care of everything. It gave me a mantra that the creation is the ultimate creator. There is no separate creator out there. Creation is the creator. And I still tap into the energy of these birds and wild animals because I realize they are being taken care of. But our insecure mind has made us feel that you will not be taken care of if you slow down a bit. So you have to rush every single day. So it's a reminder. It's still a reminder for me. And I listen to the body. That helps a lot.
Mhm. What else helps you with the insecure mind?
What else helps me? Writing helps me every single day.
Mm,
If I don't write, I know next day I'm going to feel uneasiness. And if you ask me writing what, it's writing poetry. It's writing about the Tantra work, exploring the journey of goddesses. When I notice I haven't written a poetry in a long time, that clearly means I'm out of my alignment.
mm.
If you don't see a poetry on my Instagram page, you can always check in on me. Chandresh, is everything okay? Because it's not happening, you know.
Yeah.
Writing is big one for me. Daily walks are
Mhm.
so important. I feel they help me a lot. Music is so important, but music, I listen to instrumental music, different cultures, different countries. It just runs in the background when I write. The music takes me to places where my mind or thoughts can't take me. So I end up writing based on that mood of the music that's coming to me. So these three are so, I think, so important.
I resonate with all three, and they lead me to just a moment of, I think, some reverence for you, because for me it's felt like the more connected I am to my body, the more natural a spiritual connection there is, or a more natural connection there is to nature and interconnectedness and a sense of self-reverence. And I often feel like that gets missed, at least in the conversation around embodiment or where I come from, somatic psychology. There isn't this emphasis of like, if you go inwards and feel, you're going to have this like spiritual liberation. You're going to have this like self revolution. But I'm hearing it so deeply in your language and how you speak about things. And I would love to hear from you for people that are curious about spirituality or wanting to start a spiritual path, where would you maybe like sprinkle some direction their way? Where would you maybe point them if you could subtly point them somewhere?
I feel you do such a good job of that, you know, pointing out the right directions, Ailey. I would say start with breathing, start with
Mm,
heart. Those two things. Your heart center in the Tantra traditions, the heart center is known as Anhat Chakra, means the infinite, the boundless. It's the place of your psychic and intuitive abilities.
mm,
Emotional freedom happens there. So your heart has to be your first muse in this journey. So connect to heart. And how do you connect? Channel the breathing. Breathing is prana, life force in the Tantra traditions. Everything that we witness through the lens of Tantra is energy. We do not divide energy as sexual, spiritual, emotional. We simply say energy is energy. In what direction it goes, that's in your hands, that's in your power. So start with bringing that energy, that awareness, attention on the heart center, and practice this conscious breathing. So I teach conscious breathing to everyone. uh, Conscious breathing is inhaling, holding of the breath, and exhaling. You inhale the breath, you hold it, and as you're holding, notice what happens. Listen what's cooking up, and exhale. Very soon, you'll realize the body is starting to bring up the memories, the experiences. And as you exhale, release, let go. But this is a powerful step to kickstart your Tantra journey.
mm. Is there anything else that you wish for the listeners to know about Tantra? Right at the end here, are there some pieces that you would like to sprinkle their way?
I would say Tantra invites you to indulge with awareness. Tantra says on this spiritual journey, you are not moving from imperfection to perfection, but you're moving from perfection to perfection,
Mm,
from wholeness to wholeness. So, be it Tantra, yoga, or therapy, or any work you're doing for your inner healing, move from this place of wholeness to wholeness. Do not step in thinking that I'm less of something. You are enough. You're 1,000 times enough. And Tantra invites you to embody that enoughness, but you have to believe in it. So do what it takes to accept and celebrate your enoughness. That's Tantra.
I love it. Thank you so much today for spending time and answering my questions and diving in. It was really beautiful to hear how you answered them.
Thank you, Ellie. Absolute honor. And I loved having the conversation with you. Thank you for having me.
If you found value in this episode, it would mean so much to me for you to share the podcast with friends, a loved one, or on your social platforms. If you have the time, please rate and review the podcast so that this podcast reaches a larger audience and can inspire more and more humans to connect to their bodies too. Thank you for being here and nurturing the relationship you have with your very own